get married. And in Mr. Bonesaw right over here, well, not directly by him, but on the orders, because nothing major happens in Saudi Arabia without the Crown Prince okaying it. And no one has still been held accountable. If they were held accountable, U.S. would probably do something like cut off relations, certainly sanction Mohammed bin Salman, but that hasn't happened. The Trump administration is still extremely close buddy-buddy with this administration, particularly Jared Kushner being very close to Mohammed bin Salman. So there has been no justice yet for the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. No closure for his fiancée, his family, all of the journalists who are extremely worried about reporting on the truth in Saudi Arabia because they see what happens when somebody does that. So we want to pay tribute to Jamal Khashoggi and say that Saudi Arabia is indeed a terrorist state and nobody should be going inside tonight to see the fashion show and eat the good food in here because there's nothing to celebrate about Saudi Arabia. Then we also want to talk about Saudi Arabia and the war in Yemen. So maybe somebody, you have a sign there that says End Saudi War in Yemen. And we have a lot of pictures of the children in Yemen who are dying at the rate of 1 every 10 minutes. The majority of civilians who are killed in Yemen are being killed by Saudi bombs, and those bombs are sold to the Saudis by all the Western democracies, the United States being the number one, but also the Western democracies in Europe and in Canada. Now, there has been quite a struggle in all of those countries to stop selling those weapons, and they've been successful in some countries. Here in the United States, we've built up a very broad-based coalition to stop weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, and that coalition has included the humanitarian organizations, and it's included the peace groups, and it's included people who want to see an end to this catastrophic situation in Saudi Arabia. And so we have pushed our legislators to pass legislation to stop the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, while those have passed both in the House and the Senate, which is hard to do these days, get a bipartisan consensus. When we went to the desk of Donald Trump,
No, I understand. You guys aren't in trouble or anything.
they were vetoed.
They call us against the mountain.
So we have the Secret Service here. No Secret Service. Seems to luckily be a nice Secret Service person, because sometimes they are not, as we found out on other occasions. This guy seems very nice. Just asking.
Thank you.
Okay, that was a very nice Secret Service person. We have seen very mean Secret Service people. But we won't hold it against him. So, I was saying how with this incredible coalition, and I forgot to mention in the coalition, it's also been people from the right and libertarians. A broad coalition. Quite remarkable that we had in the same coalition Koch Pink and the Koch brothers. We had Just Foreign Policy and Freedom Works. We had World Beyond War and the Cato Institute. So quite a broad coalition. We passed legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you. two of those have been to veto the legislation to stop U.S. support for the Saudi war in Yemen. So shame on Donald Trump, and thanks to those members of Congress who said no to continuing support to the war in Yemen. Now, just today there was an article that came out that looked at the catastrophic situation in Yemen and how the money that has been pledged by the world community to help the starving Yemeni people has not been delivered. And because of that, the UN is closing down all kinds of programs in Yemen. It says that health workers are not getting salaries, medicines are not being brought in, food programs are having to be cut. And this is because the world community has turned its back on the people in Yemen. Not only have they allowed this horrendous war to keep going year after year after year, and the Saudis got involved in March 2015, but they are not contributing the funds. Oh, ironically, there is one country that actually gives the most money to Saudi and to Yemeni humanitarian aid. Anyone want to take a guess what country that is?
Cuba.
Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia. They spend way more money bombing Yemen, but then they want to show the world how good they are, so they give a little money to the humanitarian aid. But it is an absolute shame that the world has not stopped this war in Yemen and that it's not delivered the money needed to keep the poor children alive, because the bombing and the war is destroying the ability to produce food, it's destroying the transportation system, and it's destroying the hospitals, the clinics, the medicines, and the world community doesn't want to pay for that. So are you coming at it, Saudi Embassy? Well, glad to see you're in one piece, unlike Jamal Khashoggi. So, that's the war in Yemen. We have many other things going on in Saudi Arabia that we are concerned about. Now, there is part of this whitewashing of Saudi Arabia campaign is to say that Tahir is a reformer and that he's bringing freedom to the women of Saudi Arabia. So we want to clarify a little bit of what's going on, because at the very time that he, quote, allowed women to drive after they've been fighting for decades in order to get that right, then he threw a bunch of the very Saudi activists who have been fighting for that right in prison. So maybe, Reagan, you can tell us a little bit about what's happening.
Absolutely, but I'm actually going to come over here and stand where you were, because today I'm going to talk about Loujain al-Hamouri. And Loujain is an incredibly brave, incredibly strong woman who is currently being detained in prison awaiting trial in Saudi Arabia for the crime of speaking up for her human rights. Everyone wants to say that Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is a reformer who's here to save the women because women were able to drive under his regime. But in reality, he was not the one who gave women the right to drive. Women earned that right for themselves through protest and civil disobedience, and Loujain al-Hamouri was a leader in that protest and in that civil disobedience. Even after he claims that he has gifted women this right that they have had in every other country, and isn't he so great for doing that, he throws Loujain and other women like her in prison and tortures them. Now, Loujain is currently sitting in prison right now, and she is currently the victim of torture involving even waterboarding of this woman simply because she stood up to be able to do something as simple as driving. And on top of that, just recently, within the past week, Saudi Arabia got a little bit concerned, because you know their government is always a little bit concerned about making sure they look good, managing their PR, and they said to Loujain, you know, if you compromise your morals, if you are willing to sign this paper and say on camera that you were never tortured by our militant regime, then you can leave. But she decided that she was going to keep sticking up for the truth and keep sticking up for what's right, and is undoubtedly facing even worse torture than she was before now because of that, because she refused to get on camera and lie. She refused to make this regime look even better. And so when we have events like this, events that politicize the Hajj, events that paper over Saudi crimes and make it look as though activists like Loujain exist in a vacuum, away from fashion shows and buffet lines, what we're really saying is that those things don't matter right now. That there is a time and a place where Loujain is integral to the goings-on of the Saudi regime. And personally, I don't think there is ever a world where she is not relevant, where Jamal Khashoggi is not relevant, where all of the other women in prison like Loujain are not relevant, and where the starving children in Yemen are not relevant. Those things don't exist in a vacuum. And when we allow them to exist in a vacuum, we become complicit. Everyone, with me. Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain!
Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain! Freedom for Loujain!
Freedom for Loujain!
So one of the things that Loujain is in prison for is that she called for an end to the guardianship system. Now, the guardianship system is a system that says a woman, well, a baby, a girl, from the time she is born to the time she dies, always have to have a male who is the guardian. And as a recent change that happened, there was a loosening of this guardianship system, and that women now, if they're over 21, have the, quote, right to get a passport and travel without getting the okay from a man. And that's a positive move in the right direction. But let's be clear, the guardianship system still exists. Women cannot marry without permission of a male. Women cannot divorce without permission of a male. Saudi Arabia remains the most gender-segregated society in the world. There are public buildings where women can't even enter, but most of them they have to enter through a side entrance. Public restaurants and other places where women cannot sit in the same room as unrelated men. Women have to cover themselves because the government forces them to do that. It is a society where women don't have equal custody rights, equal inheritance rights, equal rights in the court of law. And so women like Loujain have been fighting for their freedom. And at the time when the Crown Prince wants to take credit for any changes, any small, quote, gifts that he says he gives to the women to make them more free, we have to recognize that it is the women activists, especially those who are in prison, who deserve the credit for any movement forward, and that we are calling not only for the freedom of Loujain, but for all of those activists fighting for women's equality. And you know, they're not all women. Some of them are men. They're lawyers, professionals, men who have been on the side of women's rights. They too have been scooped up and put into prison. So the issue of freedom for these women should be a key issue for anybody who cares about equal rights. And we're just wondering, where are the crowds coming into this event? No? You walked around, there's nobody in the front.
Nobody in the front, nobody in the side, nobody anywhere.
I don't think this is going to be quite the dinner it has been in the past. This guy what? I think people are afraid to come in. They might be walking by. So why don't we do a little chanting? How about Saudi, Saudi, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Saudi, Saudi, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Saudi, Saudi, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Saudi, Saudi, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Saudi, Saudi, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Saudi, Saudi, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Saudi, Saudis, you can't hide, we can see your bloody side. Now some people might ask us, why aren't there Saudis out here with us? I do want to say that there are a number of people from Saudi Arabia who called us today to say thank you for going out there because I can't go myself. Because the Saudis who are living outside of Saudi Arabia are so afraid about being seen protesting because not only are they fearful for their own lives, but they're fearful for the lives of their relatives back in Saudi Arabia. They say that the Saudi government is so mean, so vengeful, that they will take it out on their mothers, on their fathers, on elderly grandparents, on siblings. So they're afraid to come out and exercise the rights they have in this country, their First Amendment rights here, because they know not only are those rights prohibited back in Saudi Arabia, but they're also prohibited for Saudis who live overseas. So that's why you won't see Saudis in these kind of protests, because of the fear that they have of the long arm of the Saudi government, the Saudi regime, that will reach back into their own country to find them, to punish their relatives, to send a message to other people not to protest. Now we hope you're not going inside. Yay! You're not going inside. Are you going to the Kennedy Center? Yay! Very good. So it is really interesting. I don't know that we have to talk to the group about not doing these events in Saudi Arabia anymore because I think people have gotten the message. It's not worth the $50 to go inside this bloody place and be having a celebration in the Saudi embassy. So is there anybody else who'd like to talk about Saudi Arabia, why you're here?
Good day. Good to see a good turnout outside the embassy of the most brutal dictatorship in the Middle East, which is the United States' best friend. We've been hearing a lot the last 6 months about how terrible Venezuela is, what an egregious human rights violator they are, how they're oppressing their people, and how there's a terrible humanitarian crisis. Yet we hear very little about Saudi Arabia and Israel and Honduras and Colombia. And I wonder why that could be. Well, I've come to the conclusion that the United States doesn't give a damn about human rights or about humanitarianism or about whether or not a country is a narco-state. It cares about one thing and one thing alone, and that's whether a country is serving its economic and geostrategic interests. And if it does so, there's practically nothing that Washington will overlook, whether it be beheading people in the streets, whether it be suppressing even minor political dissent, as the Saudi regime does on a frequent basis, or killing Washington Post journalists and carving up their bodies. Yet, when a country does not serve the U.S.'s geostrategic and economic interests, it's constantly singled out for isolation, for aggression, for hostility, for regime change, as we are seeing in Venezuela, while its neighbors Colombia and Honduras are getting arms to the teeth in spite of being flagrant human rights violators and narco states. So, so what we want to call out is Washington's selective indignation and shameless self-interest and lack of regard for human rights and humanitarianism. Of course, if it really cared about humanitarianism, it would be intervening to do something about the war in Yemen, which has caused the biggest humanitarian crisis probably in the world today, in which about 17 million people are at risk of starvation. But not only have they done nothing, but they've been arming the Saudis to the teeth with weapons in order for them to commit acts of state terror, such as dropping a bomb on a school bus in which 40 children died. We found out that the bomb that was dropped was manufactured by Lockheed Martin. It was in all likelihood sold to the Saudi dictatorship by the United States. During the Obama administration, there was a $60 million deal done between the so-called progressive Barack Obama administration and then King Abdullah. In fact, Obama visited King Abdullah twice during his first year in office. And when King Abdullah died, the White House issued a fawning press statement praising him, saying what a good friend of the United States he'd been, what a loyal ally he had been. And this was just a few weeks after they'd issued a damning verdict on the presidency of Hugo Chavez, who had died a few weeks earlier, and their loyal minions in the corporate press have been practically dancing on his grave. Well, whatever one thought of Hugo Chavez, even if the most cartoonish, overblown caricature was accurate, he still would have been a saint compared to King Abdullah. And it's important that we constantly stress that hypocrisy and double standard. Thank you.
So how about we do a little chant? When do we want peace in Yemen? When do we want it now? When do we want?
Peace in Yemen.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Peace in Yemen.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Peace in Yemen.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Peace in Yemen.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Peace in Yemen.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Peace in Yemen.
When do we want it?
Now.
All right, let's do a call and response, and your response will be easy. It will be, Saudi is a terrorist state. You got it?
Yes.
All right. Killing Jamal Khashoggi.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Killing Jamal Khashoggi.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Killing Jamal Khashoggi.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Bombing children in Yemen.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Bombing children in Yemen.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Bombing children in Yemen.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Starving children in Yemen.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Starving children in Yemen.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
You're not going into this embassy, are you?
No.
Oh, excellent. Yay. Good. Okay, let's keep going with that. There's a lot we can do with that one. Jailing women activists.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Jailing women activists.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Jailing women activists.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Repressing minorities.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Repressing minorities.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Repressing minorities.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Gender segregation.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Gender segregation.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting the Bahraini government.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting the Bahraini government.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting the Bahraini government.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting the military in Sudan.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting the military in Sudan.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting terrorists in Libya.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Supporting terrorists in Libya.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Spreading Wahhabism.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Spreading Wahhabism.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
Spreading bombing hospitals in Yemen,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing weddings in Yemen,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing funerals in Yemen,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing marketplaces in Yemen,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing schools in Yemen,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing schools in Yemen,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing school buses,
Saudi is a terrorist state.
bombing school buses.
Saudi is a terrorist state.
So these are just some of the reasons why Saudi is a terrorist state. And I'm glad we got out the issue of the U.S. weapons companies that are making so much money on Saudi Arabia. So are you all going into Saudi Arabia tonight?
No.
Yay! You going to the Kennedy Center?
Yes.
Very good. Kennedy Center, not Saudi Embassy. So, we're waiting around to see if anybody shows up for this shindig. It is a very, very strange affair. Maybe we should